Under the scorching sun, a lone man stood in the middle of a barren field. The earth beneath him was dry, cracked, lifeless, yet every morning he came to the same spot, gripping his shovel with tired hands, and began to dig. Neighbors laughed, children pointed, and voices echoed across the fields. "He's lost his mind. There's no water here." But the man didn't answer. He simply wiped the sweat from his forehead and kept digging day after day. Inch by inch, no applause, no results, only faith. They called him foolish, but he was chasing something they couldn't see. And one day, that same ground everyone mocked would shake with the sound of water. The farmer's name was Ravi. He lived on the edge of a small, dry village where the summers burned the earth into dust and the rains often forgot to come. Every day, he walked miles to fetch water from a distant well, his shoulders aching, his feet blistered, yet his heart unwilling to quit. One morning, while watching the sunrise over his barren land, he made a decision that would change his life. "If I can walk this far for water every day," he murmured, "why not dig my own well?" It sounded simple in his heart, but the world outside had other plans. The first day he dug for hours, breaking stones, moving dirt, and sweating under the ruthless sun. His hands bled, his back screamed, but he kept going. By evening, he had barely made a hole big enough for a bucket. The next day, when he returned to the field, a few villagers were standing nearby, smirking. "You think you'll find water here?" one shouted. "Even the gods won't waste rain on this land." Laughter rippled through the air, harsh and mocking. Ravi looked up, smiled faintly, and said nothing. He simply picked up his shovel again and started digging. Days turned into weeks. His arms grew stronger, his hands rougher, but the hole was still dry. Every evening, he'd return home with dust on his clothes and silence in his eyes. His wife, Mira, would greet him with a bowl of water and quiet worry. "You're exhausting yourself," she whispered once. "What if they're right? What if there's no water here?" Ravi looked at her, his voice soft but certain. "If I stop digging, I'll never know. If I keep digging, maybe one day I'll find it." Mira said nothing more. She simply placed her hand on his and smiled through her fear. And so he continued, alone in the fields, day after day. The laughter never stopped, but neither did he. The sun burned, the wind howled, but Ravi kept striking the ground, each strike carrying a small piece of faith. He didn't know how deep he had to go. He didn't know when water would come. All he knew was that every inch he dug today brought him one step closer to hope tomorrow. Months passed, and the hole grew deeper, but still the ground stayed dry. The once curious villagers had turned cruel, their laughter sharper than the stones beneath Ravi's shovel. "A year's gone by and not a drop of water," they sneered. "He's not digging a well. He's digging his own failure." Ravi tried not to listen, but some days the voices clung to him like dust he couldn't shake off. Each strike of his shovel now carried more weight, not of the earth, but of doubt. His arms trembled, his faith began to waver, and every morning he found it harder to walk toward that barren pit. One afternoon, after hours under the blazing sun, his shovel hit another layer of rock. It didn't move. He struck again, harder this time, but the metal rang against the stone like a cruel echo. Frustration boiled inside him. He threw the shovel aside and sat at the edge of the pit, sweat mixing with tears he refused to admit. "Maybe they were right," he whispered. "Maybe this land has nothing to give." For the first time, he didn't return to the well the next morning. He sat outside his small hut, staring at the cracked earth that stretched to the horizon. Mira quietly placed a cup of water beside him and said softly, "You've given your strength to that ground. But maybe the ground isn't the problem. Maybe it's just testing how much you truly believe." Ravi looked at her, her face calm yet strong. Something in her voice stirred him. That night, as the village slept, he walked back to the field. The moonlight fell gently on the unfinished pit. He picked up the shovel again, feeling its familiar weight. "If there's no water," he muttered, "then I'll dig until I find my faith again." He began to dig, not for the water anymore, but for the promise he made to himself, to never leave something halfway. The wind whispered through the trees, and for the first time in months, he didn't feel alone. Every strike of the shovel was slower, steadier, filled with quiet determination. The next morning, when the villagers saw him working again, their laughter returned. But this time, it didn't reach him. Ravi had found something stronger than the hope for water. He had found the strength to keep going when no one believed he should. Days rolled into weeks again, and Ravi kept digging. Each stroke of the shovel no longer driven by desperation, but by quiet faith. The villagers had grown tired of mocking him. His persistence made their laughter feel small. The sun rose and fell, seasons changed, and the once barren pit now stretched deep into the earth like a silent prayer. One evening, dark clouds gathered above the fields, and a cool wind swept through the village. Ravi stood inside the pit, his body trembling from exhaustion. As he struck the ground once more, he heard something different, a dull, hollow sound. His heart skipped. He hit again. This time, the earth beneath him cracked, and a sudden rush of cool air touched his face. A second later, a glimmer of moisture appeared in the soil. He dropped to his knees, digging with his bare hands until the mud turned damp and cold. And then, like a miracle, water burst upward, spraying across his face. For a moment, he didn't move. The sound of rushing water filled the air, mixing with the first drops of rain falling from the sky. He laughed, a deep, broken laugh that carried both pain and joy. The villagers, hearing his shouts, ran toward the field. There they saw what they once mocked, now overflowing with life. Water streamed from the ground, clear and pure. Some stood speechless, others knelt beside him, touching the cool water that seemed too impossible to be real. Ravi looked at them, tears and rain blending on his face. "I didn't find this in a day," he said quietly. "I found it one strike at a time." That night, the sound of water filled the village that once echoed with laughter. The same hands that had pointed at him now carried buckets from his well. Ravi sat beside it under the soft rain, staring at the water that reflected the moonlight. It wasn't just a well. It was proof that faith, when tested and true, could bring life from the hardest ground. The next morning, the village awoke to a sight they had never imagined. Children were laughing near the well. Women filled their pots with fresh, cold water. And even the men who once mocked Ravi stood silently, watching him draw water with a calm smile. The dusty land that had once been dry and hopeless now shimmered with life. Green shoots began to appear near the field's edge, and birds returned, singing softly in the golden light of dawn. Ravi sat beside the well, his hands resting on the shovel that had once been his burden, now his pride. Mira came and placed her hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. He smiled gently. "No," he said, "we did it. Every day you believed when no one else did." She looked at him, her eyes glistening with quiet pride. "The water was always there," he continued. I just had to dig deep enough to reach it. Word of Ravi's well spread beyond the village. Travelers came from nearby towns to see it, to drink from the water that had come from sheer will. Some asked him for advice, expecting secrets or techniques. Ravi only smiled and said, "There is no secret. You can't find water without faith, and you can't reach success without patience. Both flow only when you don't stop digging." The villagers began to see him differently, no longer as the fool who dug in vain, but as a man who taught them the power of persistence. The well became a symbol of hope, not just for water, but for every dream buried beneath doubt. Each time someone felt like giving up, they would look at that well and remember that one man's determination turned dry soil into life. Years later, when Ravi grew old, the sound of flowing water still echoed through his fields. He would often sit beside the well, watching the reflection of the sky ripple in its depths. It reminded him of all those lonely days when he had nothing but faith and a shovel. Every strike, every drop of sweat, he would whisper, wasn't just for water, it was for belief. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with gold, Ravi would smile, knowing he had proved one timeless truth. Consistency turns impossibility into destiny. The story of Ravi reminds us that success doesn't come in sudden waves. It rises slowly, drop by drop, through effort, patience, and faith. Every swing of his shovel was a step toward something invisible but real: belief in himself. The world doubted him, but he learned that true strength is built in silence, not applause. Just like water hidden deep beneath the ground, our potential waits beneath layers of fear and hesitation. It appears only when we refuse to quit. So if life feels dry, if results seem far away, remember Ravi and his well. Don't stop digging. Every small effort, every act of consistency, brings you closer to the breakthrough you're waiting for. Because success is never found overnight. It's discovered one faithful strike at a time.